Amina sat by the dim glow of the oil lamp, the soft flicker of its light casting dancing shadows across the clay walls of her small room. The night outside was thick with silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Her slender fingers trembled slightly as they moved across the coarse paper, her quill scratching steadily, each stroke carrying the weight of her heart. "Mama," she began as she always did, "tonight I miss you more than words can hold." She paused, letting a single tear drop onto the ink, watching it spread like sorrow seeping into memory. These letters were not meant for anyone's eyes but her own, nor could anyone else ever truly understand them. They were her sanctuary, her confession, and her rebellion all at once. Her mother had been her guiding light, gentle, wise, and full of stories that made even hardship sound like poetry. But after her mother's death, the world grew sharp and unkind. Her brother Jabari, once her playmate and protector, changed into something cold, controlling, and cruel. Power had entered his veins like poison the day he inherited their father's house, and with it came a hunger to dominate everything, including Amina's silence. His wife, Safara, whispered into his ear constantly, words dipped in honey but laced with venom. "Amina needs guidance," she'd say. "You must keep her from wandering into shame, from thinking she can live without your rule." And so Amina's world shrank. She was forbidden from visiting friends, barred from the market unless accompanied, and reminded constantly that she was a burden. But in the stillness of night, when everyone slept, she found freedom in ink. Her letters to her mother were filled with everything she could never say aloud, her longing, her anger, her hopes, and her dreams of a life where she could speak without trembling. Each word was a thread connecting her to the woman who once held her through storms. She wrote of the cruelty she endured, of Jabari's cutting words that stripped her confidence bare, of Safara's mocking laughter that echoed like knives in her ears. But she also wrote of the beauty she still found, the stars that seemed to wink at her when the world turned its back, the soft rhythm of the wind through the trees, and the warmth of a stray cat that came to her window each evening. Through her writing she remembered that gentleness still existed somewhere, if not in people, then in the quiet kindness of nature itself. Sometimes she wrote of a dream, one she had often, where her mother stood by a river dressed in white, her arms open, her eyes bright. "You must keep writing, my daughter," her mother would whisper in the dream. "Even if no one listens, the wind will carry your truth." Amina woke from those dreams with renewed purpose, clutching her letters to her chest as though they were talismans against despair. Over time, her stack of letters grew, tied together with a faded red ribbon, tucked safely beneath a loose plank in the floor. There were dozens of them now, each a fragment of her heart, each an unspoken prayer for freedom. The letters were her secret rebellion, the only thing she owned that her brother's authority couldn't touch. But secrets have a way of calling attention to themselves. One afternoon, as Amina was hanging laundry behind the house, she noticed Jabari standing near her window. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held suspicion. He had been watching her closely lately, questioning where she went, what she did, and why she always seemed so lost in thought. Safara had noticed it too and had begun her poisonous murmuring again. "She hides things, Jabari. She writes like a woman possessed. What if she's writing lies about us?" Amina's heart thudded in fear whenever she saw Jabari near her room. But still she wrote. She couldn't stop, because to stop writing would be to stop breathing. Even when her hands ached, even when tears blurred her vision, she continued to pour herself onto the page. One night, when thunder rolled outside and the rain beat against the roof, she wrote a letter that felt different from all the rest. "Mama," she wrote, "if these words are ever found, let them tell the truth, that I tried to live kindly, that I tried to keep hope alive, even when the world around me wanted me silent." She didn't know then that her words would outlive her pain. She didn't know that those letters, the ones she thought no one would ever see, would one day be read by eyes filled with guilt and fear. For now, she only knew that each word she wrote was a piece of her freedom, and that somewhere her mother's spirit was listening. Jabari had always believed power meant control, over land, over money, and over people. But nothing unsettled him more than the quiet sound of Amina's pen moving across paper. It was a sound he couldn't command, a world he couldn't enter. He would watch her sometimes from the doorway, pretending indifference, but the way her face softened as she wrote, as though speaking to someone he couldn't see, stirred something dark inside him. It wasn't just irritation, it was fear. Fear that within those pages, his name was written alongside the truths he'd buried under years of lies. He had reasons to be afraid. After their parents' death, Jabari had twisted the truth to secure his inheritance. He told the elders that their father had entrusted him with everything, promising to take care of his sister. But in reality the will had been different. It had given Amina a small share of land by the river, a place their mother used to call the Heart's Garden. Jabari had hidden that document, burning it before anyone could see it. And though Amina never confronted him, there was something in her eyes that made him feel she knew. Safara, his wife, fanned his paranoia with cruel precision. "She watches you," she whispered one night as they lay in bed. "She writes things. I've seen her hands shake when she hides those letters. What if she's writing to someone about us? What if she's planning to ruin you?" Jabari tried to brush it off, but the seed had been planted and it grew quickly. He began to mock Amina's writing openly. "Still talking to ghosts?" he would sneer as he passed her. "Maybe you should ask your dead mother to come fetch you. She might be the only one who'll listen to your nonsense." Safara would laugh, her voice shrill, and Amina would bow her head, letting the insult pass without a word. But her silence only deepened Jabari's unease. He couldn't tell if her calm was fear or defiance. At night, Jabari would sit outside, staring at the faint light coming from Amina's window. The thought of those letters, those hidden words, tormented him. What did she write in them? Was she telling lies about him? Was she preserving something he'd rather the world forget? He imagined her describing how he'd stolen her inheritance, how he'd forced her to stay inside, how he'd made her feel small. The thought made his skin crawl. One evening, while Amina was away helping an elderly neighbor, Jabari crept into her room. His heart thudded in his chest as he searched through her things. The air smelled faintly of dried flowers and ink. He lifted her mattress, rummaged through her clothes, even checked the wooden chest by her bed. But he found nothing, not a single page. It infuriated him. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, unaware that the letters rested safely beneath the loose plank in the floor. From that day on, his cruelty deepened. He made new rules. Amina was no longer allowed to close her door, no longer permitted to keep candles burning late into the night. He rationed her ink and paper, saying, "If you have so much to say it aloud." He wanted to crush her spirit, to make her believe that her thoughts were worthless. But Amina, though soft-spoken, had a resilience that defied him quietly. She began to write smaller, using scraps of cloth or the backs of old receipts. Her letters became shorter, but their meaning sharper, sharper than any words she'd written before. Still, Jabari couldn't rest. He began to see her letters everywhere, in the way she gazed at the horizon, in the way she smiled faintly to herself, in the rhythm of her footsteps when she walked to fetch water. The letters haunted him, though he'd never read a single one. Safara's whispers grew more poisonous. "She's laughing at you, Jabari. She thinks you're weak. She writes about your temper, your failures. Do you think she'll keep quiet forever?" The thought consumed him. He began to pace at night, muttering to himself. His jealousy twisted into obsession. And yet, beneath all his anger, there was something he could never admit, a flicker of shame. Deep down, he knew Amina's letters were not lies. They were truth, and truth was what frightened him most. Because truth, once written, never truly dies. It lingers, waiting for the moment when ink becomes voice and silence becomes the loudest form of defiance. It happened on a night heavy with heat and tension, when the moon hung low and red over the village, the color of warning. Amina had been asleep, her breathing calm, the faint scent of crushed jasmine lingering in the air. But Jabari had not slept in days. Every sound from her room felt like a secret whispered against him. That night, when he heard the creak of floorboards, his suspicion burst into fury. He stormed into her room with a lantern in hand, his shadow stretching long across her wall. Amina woke to the sight of her brother's eyes, wild, red-rimmed, and glinting with a cruel kind of victory. Without a word, he moved to the corner of her room and struck his foot against the loose plank in the floor. The hollow sound betrayed her hiding place. Amina sat up, her heart racing as Jabari pried open the board and pulled out the wooden box she'd kept so carefully hidden. He held it up, his face twisting into a sneer. "So this is where your little secrets sleep," he spat. "All your precious words. All your lies." Amina rose slowly from her bed, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "They are letters to Mother," she said softly. "They harm no one." Her calmness only enraged him more. "Lies?" he shouted, slamming the box onto the table. "You think I don't know what you're doing? Writing about me, turning people against me with your poisonous words." Before she could respond, he ripped open the lid. Inside, the folded papers looked innocent, pale, fragile, harmless. But to Jabari they were daggers aimed at his pride. He snatched a handful of letters and held them up. "These," he said, Are the chains you've made for me? Let's see how strong they are in fire." He stormed out of the room, the box clutched under his arm, and Amina followed him out into the courtyard. Safara stood at the doorway, her eyes bright with cruel curiosity. The night wind stirred, whispering through the trees as Jabari dropped the letters into a clay pot and struck a match. The flame caught quickly. Dry paper crackled and curled as the fire climbed higher, devouring the words that had once carried Amina's heart. Smoke rose like spirits fleeing the earth, pale ribbons twisting into the sky. Amina stood still, her bare feet cold against the ground, her face lit by the orange glow. She did not scream, did not cry. She only watched. Jabari mistook her silence for defeat. "There," he said with grim satisfaction, his voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "No more madness. No more secrets. No more ghosts." Amina's eyes reflected the fire, and for a moment she looked almost otherworldly, fragile yet unbroken. Inside her, a storm began to form, but she let it stay silent. She had learned long ago that some power was born from stillness. The last of the papers turned to ash, swirling in the pot like dying moths. Jabari kicked the pot over, scattering the ashes into the wind. Safara laughed softly, leaning against the doorframe. "Maybe now she'll learn her place," she murmured. But then, as if the wind itself chose to speak, a single unburned page fluttered out of the chaos. Jabari didn't notice it at first. The page rose, caught by a sudden gust, dancing above the flames, refusing to fall. It twirled once, twice, then soared upward, disappearing into the darkness beyond the courtyard. Amina's eyes followed it, that one fragile survivor. In her heart, she knew the page wasn't gone. The wind had taken it for a reason. It carried something meant to endure, a truth too strong for fire to consume. Jabari turned back to her, still breathing heavily from his rage. "It's over," he said, brushing soot from his hands. "Whatever you had in those letters, it's gone." Amina looked at him, her expression calm but her voice steady with quiet certainty. "No, brother," she said. "What is true never burns." He frowned, confused by her words, but Amina didn't explain. She turned and walked back to her room, leaving him standing alone in the dying glow of the fire. Above them, the wind carried the lone surviving page across the night sky. It drifted beyond the village, over trees and fields, until it came to rest against the roots of an ancient baobab, the same tree where Amina's mother used to tell her stories. The ink shimmered faintly under the moonlight, the words unscathed, waiting for the dawn to reveal the truth they held. Amina waited until the first hints of dawn brushed the village with gray light, the air still heavy with the smell of smoke and charred paper. Her heart had not stopped racing since the fire, and the memory of her brother's fury lingered like a shadow across her chest. Yet in the quiet hours before the sun rose, she felt a tug, subtle, insistent, like the wind itself was guiding her. She stepped outside, her bare feet damp from the morning dew, and followed the trail the surviving page had left. It wasn't difficult to trace. The wind had been gentle but persistent, tugging at her hair and the edges of her dress, leading her through the narrow alleys between huts, past the sleeping cattle, and into the edge of the forest where the old baobab tree stood like a sentinel over the village. Its trunk was wide and gnarled, roots sprawling like arms gripping the earth, and there, caught against one of the roots, fluttered the lone page. Amina approached slowly, her fingers trembling as she reached out. The paper was surprisingly intact, edges slightly singed, but the ink had not run or faded. It seemed as if the page had been waiting for her, a secret preserved against the destructive intent of her brother. She picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of words not yet spoken aloud, words that had survived because they were meant to endure. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's, the loops of letters familiar, the flow of the script gentle yet deliberate. Amina's breath caught as she began to read, each sentence unfolding a story long hidden. Her mother's words told of a betrayal that had been buried under layers of pride and greed, a truth meant to protect the innocent yet powerful enough to shatter falsehoods. The page revealed a hidden inheritance, a collection of lands and treasures her father had left her mother, intended to pass to her, but never claimed due to secrecy and fear. More shocking was the revelation of betrayal. Jabari was not the child of the father he believed in his heart to be, but of another man entirely, a fact kept hidden to maintain appearances. Her mother had written this truth in the hope that Amina would find it when she was ready to understand, when she had the strength to face the consequences. Amina's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the enormity of what she held. Her mother had trusted her with the truth, knowing that only she, patient and observant, could use it wisely. Every word on that page was a key, a means to reclaim what was stolen and to expose the lies her brother had lived by and propagated. She felt a surge of clarity, a sharp contrast to the confusion and powerlessness of the night before. The forest around her seemed to lean in closer as she read, the birds' morning songs quieting as if giving space for the words to resonate. The wind, which had carried the page to her, now swirled gently around her, rustling the leaves in approval. Amina felt a connection, to her mother, to the ancestors, to the truth that had been preserved despite human malice. It was as though the forest itself had conspired to ensure that justice would not be lost. For a moment she closed her eyes, allowing the revelations to settle. The betrayal, the inheritance, the truth of Jabari's parentage, all of it could change the balance of power in her family and village. Yet Amina knew she could not act recklessly. Her mother's careful words had also included guidance on patience, observation, and strategy. The page was not just a confession, it was a roadmap. When she opened her eyes, Amina felt renewed determination. The fire her brother had started could destroy physical letters, but it could not destroy the truths meant to endure. She tucked the page safely into her dress, pressed it close to her heart and made a silent vow. She would use this knowledge wisely, expose the lies, reclaim what was hers, and confront her brother when the moment was right. As she turned from the tree, the wind shifted, carrying her footsteps lightly back toward the village. The morning sun glinted on the leaves, casting dappled light across the path. The world seemed different now, every whisper, every shadow, every secret held new significance. Amina walked with purpose, the surviving page burning brightly in her mind, a torch of truth that could not be extinguished. The wind, ever faithful, trailed behind her as if guiding her toward justice, toward the reckoning her mother had written in quiet hope. And for the first time in many nights, Amina felt that she was truly free, armed not with anger alone, but with knowledge powerful enough to shatter the lies that had bound her family. Amina sat at the edge of the clearing, the surviving letter still carefully folded in her hands, its edges worn but its contents vivid and potent. The revelations it held had begun to form a pattern in her mind, like threads stretching across the tapestry of her family's history. As she pondered the secrets, she noticed more subtle details coming into focus, events she had once dismissed, moments that now seemed laden with hidden intent. The sudden influx of wealth that had transformed her brother Jabari's lifestyle, the whispered warnings from villagers who seemed uneasy in his presence, and the strange inconsistencies in the family accounts all converged into a troubling truth. Her brother had woven a web of lies, carefully designed to secure power and silence anyone who might uncover it. She recalled the way he had subtly manipulated the villagers, ensuring they remained fearful or deferential. Small acts, once innocuous seeming, now revealed their purpose. Gifts distributed selectively, rumors seeded strategically, and favors promised to those who stayed silent. All these threads created a network of influence that masked his true motives. Even the most respected elders had been drawn into his web, persuaded that questioning Jabari would disturb the delicate balance of the family's reputation. Amina understood, with a sinking certainty, that the deception extended far beyond personal cruelty. It had infiltrated the very structures of the village's social order. Amina began systematically piecing together the timeline of events. She remembered the sudden sales of ancestral land, decisions made with unusual haste, and the shifting terms of inheritance that had left her mother's cherished items unprotected. Her brother's confidence and arrogance now made sense. He had not only benefited from chance but had actively engineered outcomes in his favor, using forged documents and threats to reinforce his authority. Each discovery tightened the noose of understanding around her. The realization stung, but it also ignited a resolve. The web could be unraveled if she approached it carefully and strategically. Her observations extended beyond the material. She noticed behavioral patterns. Jabari's mannerisms, once brushed off as quirks or arrogance, were in fact deliberate signals to those around him. Certain words, glances, and gestures carried implicit warnings or commands. Amina had become attuned to these subtleties, recognizing how he had conditioned the household and the community to follow his cues. The recognition was empowering. Understanding the mechanisms of control was the first step toward dismantling them. Amina also began scrutinizing the legal and practical aspects of the estate. She traced the movements of property and assets, noting discrepancies in records, missing signatures, and unusual financial transactions. The letters she had written to her mother, now mostly lost, had served as informal documentation of family history and rights. The surviving page gave her the insight to identify what had been manipulated. Her mother's careful wording revealed not only the betrayal of her brother's lineage but also guidance on how to validate the truths against the falsified accounts. Even the villagers' gossip, which had once seemed trivial, now appeared as a coded reflection of the truth. Observing conversations at the market, noticing who hesitated to speak and who eagerly repeated certain narratives, Amina began mapping the social influence her brother wielded. Some were allies acting out of fear or greed, others had been genuinely deceived, and a few were potential allies if shown the evidence. She realized that unraveling the web required more than exposing lies. It demanded understanding motivations, assessing risks, and carefully choosing moments to reveal the truth. As the days passed, Amina tested her observations through small, cautious actions. She posed questions, requested documents, and noted reactions, confirming her suspicions without alerting Jabari. Every response, every attempt to conceal or manipulate, became another thread she could trace and untangle. She identified forged documents, traced the chain of signatures, and documented inconsistencies in financial statements. Each discovery fortified her confidence, reinforcing the path toward exposing the elaborate deceit. Amid this process, she also contemplated strategy. The letter's surviving page had suggested patience, observation, and timing, tools that became her guide. She knew that a direct confrontation too early could be disastrous, but carefully leveraging alliances, presenting incontrovertible evidence, and enlisting the support of those who respected her mother's legacy would gradually dismantle the control Jabari had exerted. The web was intricate, but it was not unbreakable. At night, Amina reviewed her notes beneath the flickering glow of an oil lamp, the sounds of the village muted by distance and darkness. She reflected on every anomaly, every hint, every whispered warning she had observed over the years. Slowly, patterns emerged: the timing of sudden wealth, the selective silencing of dissent, and the manipulation of inheritance. The web was not only financial or social, it was psychological, designed to instill fear, obedience, and isolation. Recognizing this allowed Amina to anticipate moves, predict reactions, and develop countermeasures that would protect herself and others. By the end of her meticulous investigation, Amina had mapped the full scope of her brother's deception. She understood the lies, the forgeries, and the psychological tactics he had employed to maintain dominance. Each connection she traced made the next step clearer. The surviving page had provided the key, and her careful observation had revealed the structure of the web. With this knowledge, she could move forward not with anger alone, but with calculated precision. The revelation was both sobering and empowering. She had uncovered a network of deceit that threatened not just her family but the integrity of the village's social and moral fabric. But now she also held the means to act, to reveal the truth, and to restore what had been stolen. Her brother's web of lies, intricate as it was, had a weakness: knowledge. And Amina possessed it in abundance, gathered with patience, insight, and unwavering resolve. The stage was set for justice, guided by the wisdom encoded in the surviving page, and the meticulous work of uncovering every thread of deception. Amina approached the elder's hut with careful steps, her mind still buzzing from the revelations she had uncovered in the surviving page. The old storyteller, known throughout the village as a keeper of histories and secrets, welcomed her with a wary but knowing gaze. He had served her parents faithfully, and although age had slowed him, his mind remained sharp, attuned to the nuances of family legacies and village politics. When Amina unfolded the page and showed it to him, his eyes widened slightly, the corners creasing as recognition settled in. "I know this handwriting," he murmured, tracing the delicate curves of her mother's letters with a trembling finger. "This is indeed hers. Whatever she wrote here carries the truth, a truth some have tried desperately to bury." Sitting across from him, Amina listened as he began recounting details long hidden from the public eye. He spoke of her mother's fears for the family, her knowledge of betrayals, and the ways in which greed had infiltrated their household. Each story matched the hints and clues in the surviving letter, confirming its authenticity. The elder revealed that her mother had entrusted certain truths to paper precisely because she feared her children might be manipulated by outsiders or deceived by those closest to them. Amina learned that Jabari's father had indeed kept secrets about inheritance and lineage, using deception and false documents to maintain control. The elder spoke of forged signatures, hidden assets, and alliances with influential villagers who were complicit in the cover-up. These revelations filled in the gaps left by the surviving page, painting a full picture of the treachery and manipulation that had dominated her family's history. Beyond the practical details of inheritance and wealth, the storyteller shared lessons embedded in her mother's words: warnings about trust, advice on patience and guidance on observing human behavior carefully. Your mother knew, the elder said gently, that knowledge is power. To see clearly, to listen, to discern, and to act with wisdom, these are the true tools to reclaim what is lost and to expose those who hide behind lies. Amina felt a growing sense of clarity. The surviving page had provided the first spark, but the elder's testimony fanned it into a flame. She now understood the depth of deception she faced and the means by which she could dismantle it. Each story, each confirmation, strengthened her resolve to act not impulsively, but strategically. By the end of their meeting, Amina left the hut with a renewed sense of purpose. She held not only the letter but the elder's guidance, both forming a foundation of knowledge and strategy. She realized that uncovering truth was as much about patience and discernment as it was about courage. The secrets she now possessed would serve as her compass, guiding her toward justice, the restoration of her family's honor, and the exposure of her brother's long-hidden treachery. Amina stepped into the dimly lit hall of their ancestral home, the surviving letter clutched tightly in her hand. Her heart pounded, but her mind was steady, each step was measured, each breath controlled. Across the room, Jabari looked up from the ledger he was inspecting, his expression flickering between irritation and unease. He sensed something had shifted, though he could not yet name it. I know everything, Amina said, her voice calm but firm. About the inheritance, about your lies, about who you truly are. She held up the page that had survived the fire, letting its presence underscore her words. The flickering light of the nearby lantern cast shadows across her determined face. Jabari's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his features before he masked it with anger. You dare accuse me? He spat, his voice sharp and trembling with a mix of fury and fear. You have no proof. These are lies, and you will regret ever speaking such nonsense. But Amina remained composed. This is no nonsense. My mother wrote the truth, and the elder confirmed it. Every piece of your deception, every scheme, every forged document, it ends here. I have the evidence and I know the truth. Her words rang out with authority, carrying the weight of years of observation, listening, and patience. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It was as if the very walls hummed with the presence of the family's ancestors, long departed but now witnessing the reckoning. The air grew thick, charged with a force neither sibling could see but both could feel. Shadows flickered across the walls, and the faint whisper of old voices seemed to murmur in alignment with Amina's courage. Jabari stepped closer, trying to tower over her, to intimidate her with sheer presence. You are defying your brother? You are nothing without me, he growled. But Amina did not flinch. Instead, she let her calm strength speak louder than any threat. I am more than you think. You built your power on lies and fear, but truth cannot be hidden forever. You cannot intimidate what you do not control. Her words seemed to echo, reverberating with a force beyond her own voice. The surviving page of her mother's letter felt warm in her hand, almost alive, as if lending her courage and authority. She continued, every villager, every friend, every witness knows the truth now. You cannot undo what has been uncovered. Jabari's rage intensified, but it became evident to him that his usual tactics, fear, manipulation, intimidation, no longer worked. The calm certainty in Amina's eyes, the knowledge she wielded, and the subtle yet undeniable presence of ancestral witnesses created a power he could not challenge. Amina stood firm, unyielding, embodying the strength, wisdom, and justice her mother had hoped she would inherit. The confrontation was no longer just about exposing deceit, it was about reclaiming her family's honor, restoring balance, and demonstrating that courage paired with truth could topple even the most entrenched of lies. By the end of the confrontation, Jabari realized that his reign of manipulation had crumbled. The room was silent except for the steady breathing of the siblings and the faint, almost imperceptible whispers of the ancestors, affirming that justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. The moment the confrontation ended, word of Amina's revelation spread through the village like wildfire. Whispers carried from door to door across the market and through narrow alleys, reaching the ears of elders, neighbors, and even those who had once turned a blind eye to Jabari's manipulations. By midday, the village square was filled with people, a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and expectation painted on every face. The elders, robed in their customary garments of authority, took their seats in solemn silence. Their eyes, sharp and discerning, studied both siblings, sensing the weight of the moment. Jabari, once confident and imposing, now fidgeted under the scrutiny of the community he had long sought to manipulate. A hush fell over the square as Amina stepped forward, holding the surviving page of her mother's letter aloft for all to see. This letter survived the fire, Amina began, her voice steady and clear, carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. It holds the truth of our family, truths my brother tried to bury, lies he tried to spread, and a legacy he attempted to steal. The words on this page reveal his deceit, his greed, and his betrayal. She allowed the villagers a moment to absorb the weight of her words, the authenticity of her calm determination resonating in the space around her. Jabari tried to speak, to dismiss her claims, but the elders raised their hands, signaling him to remain silent. The letter's contents were read aloud, each sentence revealing layers of manipulation: the theft of inheritance, the falsification of documents, the threats made to villagers, and the destruction of family heritage. The villagers listened, their initial disbelief transforming into shock, then into understanding as the narrative of Jabari's treachery unfolded. One by one, witnesses who had previously been intimidated stepped forward, confirming details they had observed but feared to speak. Their accounts aligned with the letter, creating an irrefutable web of evidence against him. The elders, recognizing the gravity of the situation, conferred quietly among themselves, weighing justice against the disruption Jabari had caused. Finally, the chief elder stood, his voice carrying authority tempered with measured compassion. "Jabari," he intoned, "your actions have harmed your family and your community. You have used fear and lies to claim what was not yours and sought to suppress the truth. The village cannot condone such deeds. You will restore what you have taken and make amends to those you have wronged." Jabari's shoulders slumped. The crowd murmured approval as the elder's judgment was accepted as final. Amina, standing tall, felt the release of long-held tension. The village had seen the truth, and justice, guided by courage, intelligence, and perseverance, had prevailed. That day, the village not only restored its sense of order and fairness but also recognized the power of vigilance and truth. Amina's resilience had illuminated the darkness of deceit, proving that even when one's adversaries wield power and intimidation, clarity, courage, and unwavering integrity can triumph. Jabari's downfall was swift and undeniable. Once the villagers had witnessed the truth revealed by Amina's surviving letter and the corroborating testimonies, the web of fear and control he had spun began to unravel. Those who had once supported him either out of loyalty or fear, started to withdraw their allegiance. His closest allies, seeing that his influence had crumbled and that siding with him would bring no benefit, quietly distanced themselves, leaving him isolated in the very community he had tried to dominate. The villagers, who had previously turned a blind eye to his schemes, now confronted him directly. Shopkeepers refused to trade with him, neighbors avoided his home, and whispers of his deceit followed him wherever he went. His attempts to defend himself rang hollow against the weight of the letter's revelations and the undeniable truth spoken by the witnesses. Each step he took seemed to remind him of the irreversible loss of trust and respect, the foundations of his power dismantled piece by piece. Even within his own household, the consequences were clear. Friends who had visited or aided him in secret no longer offered their support, and his wife, who had once quietly encouraged his manipulations, began to recognize the futility of loyalty to a man whose credibility had evaporated. Jabari, who had once ruled through intimidation, now faced the silence of abandonment, a stark reminder of the emptiness that deceit and cruelty inevitably bring. Amina, meanwhile, walked through the village with a sense of quiet triumph. She did not gloat or mock. Her presence alone demonstrated the strength and integrity that had allowed her to restore balance. Children followed her at a respectful distance, inspired by her courage, and villagers sought her counsel, recognizing that her wisdom had illuminated what had long been hidden in shadows. The weight of injustice that had pressed upon the community began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of fairness and accountability. Perhaps most importantly, the spirits of their mother and father seemed to settle. The oppressive tension that had lingered over the family for years, born from lies, manipulation, and hidden truths, finally eased. Amina's bravery had not only exposed the deceit but had also honored the memory of her parents, reclaiming the dignity and justice that had been denied to them. The letter, once nearly lost to flames, had become the instrument of restitution, bridging the gap between the living and the spiritual, between secrecy and revelation. Jabari, stripped of influence and respect, now faced the consequences of his actions alone. His schemes, which had once seemed invincible, lay in ruins, a testament to the power of courage, intelligence, and persistence in the face of oppression. In that moment, the village understood a profound truth. Deceit may rise, but integrity, patience, and the courage to seek the truth will always prevail, restoring harmony and justice to those brave enough to pursue it. Amina set about restoring not just her family's home, but the dignity and legacy that had been tarnished by years of deceit and manipulation. Every corner of the house, from the worn floors to the faded walls, became a canvas for renewal. She repaired the broken roof, polished the wooden beams, and carefully restored the family's treasured belongings, making sure that every item carried the memory of her parents' love and integrity. In doing so, she honored their memory, transforming a place once shadowed by fear and betrayal into a home of warmth, light, and guidance. But Amina understood that rebuilding a home was only part of the restoration. She began writing letters again, this time filled with hope, wisdom, and encouragement. These letters were addressed not only to herself but to others in the village who might be struggling with injustice, loss, or secrecy. Through her words, she shared lessons learned from her trials, the importance of patience, the courage to confront wrongdoing, and the strength found in seeking and protecting the truth. Each letter became a thread in the fabric of the community, weaving a culture of honesty and resilience that had been long absent. Villagers soon recognized Amina as a guide and teacher, someone whose experience could illuminate paths they themselves might never see. They came to her with their concerns, their questions, and their troubles, knowing that her counsel was rooted in both experience and compassion. Amina listened carefully, offering advice that balanced practicality with moral insight, always emphasizing the value of truth, patience, and thoughtful action. Beyond her immediate circle, the story of the letters that had survived the fire, revealing hidden truths and restoring justice, spread throughout the region. People learned that courage and integrity could overcome even the most insidious deceit. Amina's act of reclaiming her family's legacy became a symbol of resilience, proof that no amount of betrayal could extinguish the light of honesty and perseverance. In rebuilding her life and her home, Amina not only restored what was lost but also created a lasting legacy for future generations. Her letters, her teachings, and the example of her courage became tools for others to navigate their own challenges. The village, once shadowed by fear and manipulation, now thrived in a community where truth was honored, wisdom was shared, and the memory of injustice served as a reminder of the strength found in resilience and integrity. Years after the events that had shaken her family and village, Amina's story became more than just a tale of personal triumph. It became a living legend, passed from one generation to the next. Villagers spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the young woman who had endured betrayal, cruelty, and the destruction of what she held most dear. Her letters, yet had risen stronger than ever. They told how, amid the flames that consumed so many fragile papers, one solitary page had survived, carried by the wind as if guided by unseen hands. That single page had revealed hidden truths, exposing deceit, restoring justice, and giving voice to those who had been silenced. In village gatherings, under the shade of ancient trees and around the warmth of evening fires, mothers would recount the story to their children. They spoke of the girl who had not only endured loss but had also learned the power of patience, observation, and courage. Truth, they would say, cannot be destroyed. It only waits for the right wind to carry it back to those who will honor it. Children listened wide-eyed, imagining letters riding the wind, escaping flames, and finding their way back to the hands of someone brave enough to use them wisely. The story inspired awe, wonder, and a deep respect for honesty and integrity. The legend emphasized that justice need not always be immediate to be inevitable. Amina had learned that even when the world seemed to conspire against the truth, persistence and careful observation could uncover what was hidden. Her letters, once thought lost, symbolized more than mere paper and ink. They represented memory, conscience, and the courage to confront falsehoods. Through them she had challenged power, exposed corruption, and restored her family's honor. Villagers marveled at the thought that a single act of perseverance, like preserving one page against the odds, could unravel webs of deceit woven over years. Over time, the tale became interwoven with the identity of the village itself. Elders cited it as a moral compass, teaching that even the smallest act, recording a thought, standing quietly in patience, or observing carefully, could shape the fate of many. Children grew up aspiring to emulate Amina's bravery and wisdom, understanding that integrity and attentiveness held the power to counter injustice in ways that sheer force never could. Schools of thought emerged in the village. Some taught that knowledge and memory were the ultimate tools of resistance, while others stressed that courage coupled with intelligence could overcome even the most cunning adversaries. Amina herself became a revered figure, often called upon to mediate disputes, share her counsel, and teach the next generation. She emphasized the lessons that had been most crucial to her survival: the importance of recording truth, the necessity of listening and observing, and the need to act decisively when opportunity arose. Her teachings were not just about preventing wrongdoing but also about fostering resilience and moral clarity in a community that had once been vulnerable to deceit. The surviving letter, preserved carefully in a cedar box in her home, became a symbol of the enduring power of truth. Pilgrims from neighboring villages sometimes came to see it, hoping to feel the presence of justice it represented. The paper itself was fragile, its edges scorched, the ink faded in places, yet it remained legible, a tangible reminder that truth, once spoken or written with intention, could not be fully erased. Amina would recount the story of how the wind had saved it, explaining that the forces of nature, justice, and fate often align to ensure that right prevails. As generations passed, the story took on a life of its own. Songs were composed, plays enacted during village festivals, and poems written to honor the girl who had outwitted cruelty and preserved what others sought to destroy. Mothers invoked her name as they encouraged honesty in their children, fathers referenced her bravery when teaching lessons about justice, and teachers recounted her cleverness as a model of strategic thinking. Every telling reinforced the lesson that vigilance, courage, and wisdom could overcome oppression, no matter how formidable the threat. In this way, Amina's legacy became more than a personal victory, it became a communal beacon. The legend of the burning letters taught that even when darkness seems overwhelming, the truth has a way of returning. It is resilient, patient, and persistent, much like the girl who had once endured loss but emerged victorious. Villagers knew that as long as they remembered her story, no lie could hold for long, and no injustice would remain hidden forever. Even today, when storms sweep through the village, people whisper of Amina and the letter that rode the wind. They remind their children to be observant, to listen carefully, and to have the courage to act when the truth is revealed. The tale stands as an eternal reminder that while lies can be created and nurtured, the power of honesty, once discovered and championed, is unstoppable. It is a story of endurance, cleverness, and moral strength. The story of the girl whose letters, though almost destroyed, became the very instrument of justice and the foundation of a legend that would never fade.